Good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to this press conference organized for the day of the Parliament giving its consent for the Economic Partnership Agreement with Japan with a solid majority. I will give the floor first to the rapporteur, Mr. Pedro Silva Pereira. Then the chair of the International Trade Committee, Mr. Bernd Lange, is going to speak. And finally, the Commissioner Malmström will have the floor. Mr. Pereira.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to you all. Let me begin by saying that this is a very good day for the EU trade agenda and, of course, for the relationships between the European Union and Japan. The European Parliament has voted with a strong majority in favor of this trade agreement, which is in fact the largest trade agreement ever concluded by the EU. It is an agreement of major strategic importance, also of great economic importance, but it is also a progressive agreement. I believe that we only had this strong majority in the European Parliament because we are talking about an agreement of a new generation that deals not only with tariffs and non-tariff barriers, but also with sustainable development, with environmental concerns, with consumer protection, with labor rights. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we've got in the European Parliament a wide majority, wider than the one that we've got for the agreement with Canada. And that shows that we've worked in a constructive manner and having on board the views of different sectors. And I think this is important. And the second thing I would like to draw your attention to is to the fact that now the European Parliament not only approved the agreement, but approved a resolution with strong messages on trade and calling both partners to take to full use of the potential, the progressive potential of this agreement. This is important because when we voted the agreement with Canada some time ago, we did not succeed in approving a resolution. The European Parliament finally said yes to the agreement with Canada, but failed to approve a common resolution. In fact, all the groups presented different resolutions, and they all were defeated. Now, this was a completely different story. We were able to build compromises, a common understanding between the major political groups, and now we have strong messages calling for the full implementation of the commitments on sustainable development, and also asking for a timely use of the review clause to improve even further the enforceability of the Sustainable Development chapter. So, as standing rapporteur, I'm quite satisfied with the outcome of our vote today, and I think we have reasons to be happy because this is important for the EU trade agenda and, in fact, also important for the European project. The European institutions are proving today that they can take decisions, they can respond in a timely manner to the existing challenges, and as you all know, in a time where we are facing a wave of protectionism, the fact that the European Parliament is now approving an agreement is a strong signal in favor of a fair and rules-based trading order. In fact, more regulated globalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur. Mr. Lange.
Thanks a lot. Yes, indeed. Trade policy and trade as such is in troubled water, if you are looking around. And therefore, it's really a positive signal that we are able to build a solid ship which is able to sail in this troubled sea. And I'm really a little bit proud about that our rapporteur and the Parliament and, of course, the Commission really are able to create such a solid ship, which is covering round about 30% of the worldwide GDP and covering round about 40% of the worldwide trade. So it's a strong signal that we, the European Union and Japan, want to proceed in a specific way in our trade relations. This trade relations should be based, as our rapporteur said, on rules, so that we agreed on standards, on international standards, on labor rights, on environmental rights, on the Paris Climate Agreement, and so on and so on. So we, as partners, agreed on rules. And this is a clear statement that we stick to the ruling of rules and not on the ruling of power. Everybody knows that there is a tariff man on the other side of the Atlantic. And our answer is clear that we are not a tariff man, we are the people of fair trade.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now over to the Commission. Trade Commissioner Cecilia Malmström, please.
Thank you very much. In many ways, it is, of course, a very sad day today, and we pay tribute to the victims from yesterday. But in trade, it is a good day, and I would like to thank Mr. Silva Pereira for your leadership steering this through the European Parliament. It's been tough sometimes, but you've been extremely constructive and hardworking, and it paid off with a very, very strong majority here in the vote a couple of hours ago. Also, Mr. Lange, as chair of the INTA committee, has played an important role as well, so I want to thank both of you for your strong commitment and your hard work here. This is indeed it's not only the biggest trade deal Europe has done, it's the biggest trade agreement ever in the world. There is no other that is so big. 630 million people, and as said, 1/3 of the global GDP. Two very big economies in the world coming together, saying that we think trade is a good thing if you do it right. If it can be mutually beneficial, we take away tariffs, we open up each other's markets, we give possibilities to our consumers, to our companies. There's a special chapter on small and medium-sized companies, and to our entrepreneurs to trade more with each other, scrapping basically all tariffs on important exports for the European Union in the food and agri-sector, cheeses, wine, woods, cosmetics, clothing, and opening up new possibilities to export beef, of course. Japan has also committed to observe international car standards. The European Union does that since a long time ago, and this is, of course, very good for our car industry. EU companies can bid on public contracts in more than 50 big Japanese cities. More than 70,000 European companies export to Japan today, and we hope that that figure will become biggest. So this is a good trade agreement, opening up new possibilities. Also, as has been said by the rapporteur and Mr. Lange, it also contains strong commitments to work together on sustainable trade, to align our trade with the Paris Agreement, and to work together on clear rule-based trade, improve the multilateral system, sending a very, very strong global signal that goes beyond the European Union and Japan as well. This is the first trade agreement that actually refers legally to the Paris Agreement. That is now the standard, of course. We have all along this worked with the civil society, with small businesses, with consumer organizations, with trade unions, and we will continue to do so, and of course with the European Parliament in the implementation. Japan has already made the necessary arrangements for this, and we count on this entering into force the 1st of February next year, so it's quick. We can have the benefits very soon.
Thank you, Madam Commissioner. So the biggest trade deal ever. Now the floor is yours. We have a good 15 minutes for your questions. Please state your name, your media, and who you direct your question to. The floor is yours. Please.
Speaking for Swedish. Commissioner Malmström, in what way will this agreement be good for Sweden?
Well, what is good for Europe is also good for Sweden. But Sweden today is already an important exporter to Japan when it comes to certain food, but also especially in the wood and furniture sector. And there are tariffs there, and they will disappear. So that is the good news for Sweden. I think in the spirit sector as well, there are possibilities opening. And many Swedish small and medium-sized companies who would like to export or who are already doing it today will find that it is easier. We are setting up special provisions for the small and medium-sized companies to help them overcome language and cultural differences that do exist, to make sure that we can have contact points and user-friendly material for them. And I know that through the Swedish Chamber of Commerce, there is already preparations ongoing to assist the companies who should so wish. And also, Sweden is a strong defender of the multilateral system, and this is an even stronger signal that it works, and some of us are ready to defend it.
Thank you. Next question. Please, go ahead.
Speaking for Swedish media, what concessions did you have to make in the negotiations with Japan?
When you negotiate, you give and take. That all countries and all partners have offensive interests and defensive interests. It's hard to say because you open up your markets basically totally, but there is a certain protection for sensitive products and some phasing in. I know that in the in the car industry, one very important concession that the Japanese did was to commit themselves to move to international standards. Today there's double production, international standards and Japanese standards. In return, we opened up our markets in a phase-in for 7 years for Japanese car industry. So that's give and take, but I think overall that it would be beneficial for both of us. We have seen that in the past.
Thank you. Any more questions? Have we been exhaustive? Please.
Gabriel Erling Perez of Dalarnas Tidningar, also in Sweden. If we don't have time, I might ask Cecilia Malmström if you would elaborate a bit more about the attack here in Strasbourg yesterday, and sort of what do you see the role of the European Union in addressing this event that we've seen here?
Maybe if there are questions on the agreement, we can come back to that.
Because I think the next press conference is exactly on this item.
Thank you. Any more questions? Please.
But you need to use the microphone.
Yes. Mrs. Malmström, what about the Mercosur negotiations ongoing? They have around, in this week in Latin America, first question. Second question, are you worried about the new Brazilian government?
You never get enough. We deliver Japan and you immediately start asking for the next agreement. It is true, madam. No, I'm joking. It is true that my team is in Montevideo this week. They've been there since Sunday night and they are negotiating, trying to find solutions to some of the remaining issues. We have made enormous progress this year, but there are still issues remaining, both some very sensitive political, as always, for the end game, but also some more technical that needs work. So I hear that there is progress, but it's still not done yet. We are negotiating with the current government of Brazil, obviously. That's what we can do. And we don't really know much about the incoming. I mean, apart from what we read in the newspapers, we haven't spoken to them yet. So we will have to continue negotiations and talks until the end of the year with this one, and then we will have to see what happens next year. And in the end, I mean, should there be any changes, it is, of course, for member states to give us direction to that. So we continue until the end of the year to make as much progress as possible, and I think we are close to conclude, but it will not happen this week.
Mr. Lange, please.
Perhaps a short addition. Yes, the negotiations are going on, but of course, link to the Japan agreement, of course, this is a kind of yardstick, this agreement. And therefore, of course, our advice is to the negotiator on both sides, have a look to the Japan agreement and don't undermine the agreed standards. So there is a clear message. This is a kind of yardstick for future agreements, and of course, Latin America, the Mercosur region, is politically and economically really important, and I myself push very much for the conclusion of such agreement, but respecting the conditions.
Thank you. Any more question on the EU-Japan trade deal? Yeah, please.
You mentioned that that it's giving and taking in these kinds of agreements. In which industries within the European Union would we see increased competition following this trade agreement?
But that, of course, we can't say. It depends on how industries use the agreement. The potential is huge, but it would be for the individual companies to use them in a way. We can help, we can support, we can guide, and we count on member states to do that, because the Commission or the Parliament, we don't trade with anybody as an institution. It's the member states' companies, so they will have to be engaged as well. And then, of course, we will follow up very closely, do analysis and see, but I cannot speculate on that, and it wouldn't be my role to do that either.
Mr. Pereira, please.
Just a short note that I would like to make today, to say that to thank the cooperation we had with the Commission. It was very fruitful, and I must say that one name must be mentioned here, Mauro Petrucciani, the chief negotiator. He made a very good job, and we are thankful for all the cooperation we had along this very long process. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question for you. Yes, please.
I was also wondering which mechanisms have been put in place to ensure the implementation of the sustainability parts of the deal, and also if that sustainability, if the sustainability parts also include a gender perspective. Sorry?
Who are you directing the question to?
Whichever person in the panel that wants to answer.
There was a debate on the enforceability of the Sustainable Development chapter. The resolution that we've approved as call both parties to make use of the review clause that is in the agreement in order to improve the enforcement mechanisms of the Sustainable Development chapter. I would like to make clear, however, that after the ruling of the European Court of Justice on the Singapore Agreement, it is clear that already the provisions on the sustainable development of our trade agreements allow for trade sanctions, meaning that the breach of those provisions allows the EU, well, both parties in fact, to suspend provisions on trade on the basis of the breach of those provisions. So the idea that those sustainable development chapters are not binding and that there are no sanctions that can be applied must be reviewed in the light of this decision of the European Court of Justice.
To finalize this, every agreement, of course, has its checkpoints. I mean, we will establish immediately like 25 different committees in the different areas who will meet regularly from both sides to make sure that we deliver what we have promised and see if there can be improvements. On the sustainability chapters, of course, there is always a possibility to suspend the whole agreement should there be severe violation of human rights. But Japan is a democracy, a country with the rule of law and a fair press and so on. So I don't really think that will happen. But we will immediately start engaging with our Japanese partners on the implementation of all chapters to make sure that they function and we can identify if there are problems on a short-term basis so that it really it works as we have intended it to.
And indeed, the European Parliament is really convinced that the involvement of civil society in the implementation and the monitoring of such a trade agreement is essential, so that at the end of the day, the benefit of such a trade agreement is really going to the people on the ground. And therefore, the establishment of a domestic advisory group, of a civil society forum, and mechanism to give advice to the government is in the agreement. And I myself wrote a letter to the Japanese government asking for the proper implementation of this obligation, and there was a clear commitment, and they started even before the agreement is coming into force with this preparatory work.
Thank you. Any more questions? Thank you. If you need more information, there is a press release online, and feel free to contact the press service. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Rapporteur, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.